Wow, the election got weird over the weekend. It just got very weird over the weekend. There's an interesting, Donald Trump not paying taxes, taking $1 billion, almost $1 billion, 900 and change $1 million loss in 1995. I remember 1995. How did anybody lose money in 1995? I mean, we were in the middle of the dot-com bubble. It was exploding. People were climbing over each other to throw money at pretty much everything. And, maybe it was a massive depreciation. Like, God only knows. I understand Trump Airlines might have gone down around that time. I haven't seen, nobody to this point, as best I can tell, has produced an analysis of where that loss may have come from. But there's an interesting piece in the New York Times today by James B. Stewart. And in fact, it's titled, How Donald Trump Turned the Tax Code into a Giant Tax Shelter. And he's interviewing this guy by the name of Rosenthal, who's, an expert in taxes and all this kind of stuff. And Mr. Rosenthal, Stephen M. Rosenthal, a senior real estate tax specialist and senior fellow at the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center, says there's probably no special interest more favored by the tax code than real estate. He said, in examining the often lauded tax reforms of 1986. Now, this is when Ronald Reagan dropped the top tax rate. This was in 86, I'm pretty sure. It had already been dropped from 74 to like 50%. I think around 83, maybe 84, there were a couple of them. But in 86, they dropped it down to 28%. And that, everybody says, oh, that was the beginning of all the wonderful stuff. Well, that was kind of the beginning of the end, actually. But in examining the often lauded tax reforms of 1986, he found all these carve-outs for real estate interests. It's a monument to lobbying and the influence of real estate interests, he said. Right. And clearly it is. So it's, we've got that. And in fact, this is, Donald Trump has said some interesting things about taxes in the past. Some of his tweets, this is by Judd Legume over at Think Progress. Trump slammed Obama for only paying 20% on his income, on his $790,000 a year salary. He tweeted out, Barack Obama wants to raise all our taxes, only pays 20.5% on $790,000 salary. Do as I say, not as I do. Right. Well, here's Donald Trump from 2011, when he wasn't running for president. This is 5 years ago, complaining about people apparently like himself who pay no taxes. Here he is.
When the president, Donald, talks about there has to be shared sacrifice, there are a lot of people in this country, over half don't even pay any federal taxes. So he's really talking about you. You're going to have to sacrifice more.
Well, I don't mind sacrificing for the country, to be honest with you. But, you do have a problem because half of the people don't pay any tax. And when he's talking about that, he's talking about people that aren't also working, that are not contributing to the society. And it's a problem. But we have 50%. It just hit the 50% mark. 50% of the people are paying no tax.
Well, number one, Trump suggests that these people, he must think half the country's on welfare, right? He doesn't realize that people working at low-wage jobs or part-time jobs may be making below the poverty threshold, and they're barely able to make it through, and their income is not high enough that it starts being taxed, except that 100% of those people are paying payroll taxes on their income. 100% of them are paying Social Security taxes. They're paying Medicare taxes. There's no escaping that, no matter how poor you are. If you get a wage, those get deducted out of it. So they are paying federal taxes. They're just not paying federal income taxes. And apparently neither is Donald. Another one of his tweets, half of Americans don't pay income tax despite crippling government debt. Well, that's because, under Reaganomics, half of Americans are living in poverty. This was not the case in 1979. It is the case now. He bragged about how much he pays in taxes. Trump is an American who will pay more taxes in 1 year than you paid your entire life. Right. This is one of his tweets, not a recent one. These are older tweets that Think Progress dug out. 7 tweets. If Amazon ever had to pay fair taxes, its stock would crash. It would crumble like a paper bag. The Washington Post scam is saving it. Right. Oh, and this is a great one. You know what is the worst? This is a tweet from Donald Trump. You know what is the worst of Barack Obama's Tuesday speech, plain class warfare? We paid for it with our tax dollars. Not your tax dollars, Donald. Very strange stuff. Meanwhile, the Friday apparently they apparently finally got through on the Alicia Machado stuff and said, Donald, somebody at 3 o'clock in the morning Saturday night, Friday night, Saturday morning, had snatched Donald's Android phone and said, no, you're not going to do this. It's pretty amazing. But the other thing about this, all of his surrogates are going on TV saying, well, he had to take these huge tax breaks in order to avoid being sued by his stockholders. Well, first of all, he doesn't have stockholders. He does have stockholders, but it's not a publicly traded company. And it's basically, a whole series of like family-owned businesses and trusts and sub-S corporations and things like that. So number one, that's a nonsense lie. But number two, this was not his business tax return. This was his personal tax return. Now, obviously, he's passing through stuff from a number of his businesses. To have a $1 billion loss on your personal tax return is pretty startling. But just think about this for a minute. Here's a guy. Now, I run a business. Right? This radio show is a business, and the TV show that we do at night. And, Louise handles the bookkeeping, and it's a business. We run it as a business. But if my business lost money, and it did, by the way, the first 3 years of this show, we started this show in 2003 in my living room in Vermont. And I was the first engineer, an old ham operator. I know how to put stuff together. I built the studio. I used to work in radio. I knew how to do radio. We got a local phone company to bring phone lines in so we could take calls. And for the first 3 years, Louise and I took no salary. But there were a lot of expenses. We lost money. But I can't deduct that from this year's taxes. It's not an option. Maybe there's some slick way to do it. Maybe if I'd met with some, multi-million-dollar tax accountant, he could have figured something out. But really, this is a carve-out for the real estate industry. We've got a couple of industries in this country that are so heavily subsidized. Real estate being at the top in terms of tax subsidies, the oil industry is massively subsidized, or the fossil fuel industry, oil, coal, and natural gas, massively subsidized. Pharmaceutical industry is massively subsidized. About 70% of the research is paid for by you and me through government-sponsored research done at universities, and then these drug companies take the profits and run. You just go through the list, of all the industries that are import cheap stuff from overseas industry is subsidized to the tune of, $2 trillion being kept in offshore tax shelters. It goes on and on, but there's no subsidies for small business people like me, or if you're not a small business person, just wage earners. Can you imagine somebody losing their job, somebody being laid off because, say, Donald Trump's airline filed bankruptcy, or Donald Trump's vodka company went bankrupt or went out of business, or Donald Trump decided not to pay. Remember the piano guy who got the $100,000 deal to do fancy pianos for Donald Trump, and Trump paid him $70,000, and when he asked for the remaining 30, Trump said words to the effect of, "Hey, you can brag that you got my business. That's got to be worth 30 grand to you," or something like that. Those maybe he could take a loss on that. I'm not sure, but basically the people that Trump screwed, working people who didn't get paid or who got paid less than they should have or got exploited, so they can't. They're not going to be able to not pay taxes for the next 20 years. This is largely unique to the real estate industry. So it's his personal income taxes. There's no threat of a stockholder revolt. There's no threat of people, you know, suing him because on his personal taxes, he didn't take a $917 million loss that he could then spread out for, you know, average people can't do this. Billionaires can. There's something fundamentally wrong with that on its surface. And no, if you think that Donald Trump is going to fix that loophole for people like himself, you're nuts. We'll be back.